little bit about the importance of evaluation work for deflection teams. And we're going to do that in 10 to 12 minutes on a topic that Sarah and I could probably talk all day about. So hold on, it's going to be a bit of a ride. So we're going to kind of keep this high level, but we're going to talk about kind of 4 key areas. One is just really why is it so important? And we'll talk about that. What are some of the challenges in doing evaluation work within the deflection model? Some basic tenets of evaluation, and then really kind of getting back to basics around kind of day-to-day operational things around data collection. And so we're going to start there. So if we take a look at the reasons why it's so important, there are a number of them. Sarah, for some reason, that's really skewed on my screen, so I may have to look over here.
Can everyone else see it okay?
I can see it, but it's really blown up.
All right. Do you want me to read it?
I've got another version right here on a second computer.
Okay.
What happens when you've got a little bit of a obsessive compulsive tendencies. So the first one really is accountability, quite honestly, and that's both from a mission standpoint and a fiscal standpoint. So obviously, everyone on the call is in the business of human lives, right? You're trying to change lives, save lives, literally. And so we need to have some data around the fact that we are doing those things and what that looks like and what the outcomes are from a mission standpoint. But we also need it from a fiscal standpoint because most of us are funded through some form of public dollars. And so we need to be able to talk about how those dollars are being spent. So one of them is really just pure accountability. The other one is sustainability. And so what we know is that I don't think the landscape has changed much in this respect, but it seems like deflection teams are often vulnerable to having to chase the next grant cycle to chase the next funding source. There isn't necessarily a sustainable funding stream available. And part of the reason why behind that is likely because we don't yet have a strong, robust evidence base to show and prove that QRTs so-called work. And this is what they do. It's building. We're not quite there yet. And so having data, both your own internal day-to-day data that you can be able to make the case to show the work that you do to local policymakers and funders and to try to be able to leverage that data for money is very important, as are the bigger evaluations, like the kind of work that Sarah and I do to be able to show down the road 3, 4, 5 years, like this is the impact of QRTs are also very important. And putting those things together is what kind of gets us usually to a more stable funding state for various kinds of interventions. The third one, which is really dear to my heart, is continuous quality improvement. So again, when agencies have really strong data, it's really helpful internally to be able to show you where your gaps are, maybe groups of folks maybe that you're missing or just not able to engage as well. And you're able then to kind of to right size your services and your interventions to kind of pinpoint those things. And it gives you a really clear map for problem solving versus just us relying on our intuition or our professional judgment. That data can really kind of help us do that. And the plug I always make for CQI is, at least in other areas of the criminal justice world, we do have pretty clear data that CQI kinds of activities in and of itself impact outcomes for agencies. So we know, for example, in halfway houses and CBCFs, we know in drug courts that those agencies that collect data and use it routinely for program improvement actually have lower recidivism rates than programs that don't do that. So we do know that even though it's hard to sometimes put that money aside for that kind of function versus a service delivery function, that when it's done right and done well, it does actually contribute to both mission and then that fiscal piece in terms of being able to use your data more to be more efficient and more effective over time. So CQIs are a really strong reason to have a strong kind of infrastructure for data. And the last is professionalization. So that we have, again, to be taken seriously as a field, you usually have to have some type of evidence base, right, to show that you work. It also speaks to how we replicate over time, like so that as new QRTs come on board, we have stronger, more consistent data to be able to show them in terms of how they get up and running, and then how we take things to a much larger scale than we already are today. So those are kind of some 4 kind of key basic reasons why evaluation data are so important, whether that's data that you're collecting internally on your own or when you're working externally with evaluators. All right, next slide. So some of the challenges in terms of the current landscape are, there's quite a few. So one, as you're well aware, there's a lot of heterogeneity amongst deflection teams. And so we did a study a few years back where we actually interviewed folks that work in this space across the state of Ohio. And we saw a lot of variation, both in terms of who's on the team, in terms of the types of agencies that are represented, from law enforcement to treatment to public health to EMTs. So the composition varies quite a bit. What I would call dosage varies quite a bit. So like how much a team can be out in the field, whether that's 1 or 2 afternoons a week, for example, for a couple hours or more. Their local context is obviously widely varies in terms of what's available in the community for treatment. which is really important for a QRT, obviously, right? Because you guys are just really that first step. So when we talk about what an outcome should be for a QRT, I know there's a lot of focus on overdose, but the reality is lots of things happen between a QRT handing someone off to treatment and that next overdose event. And so what's available in that community and how and other kinds of things, like if you're rural versus urban in terms of how long it takes to get to folks, for example, just even how long it takes to drive to someone's house, if you are a county that butts up against other states and so you have kind of interstate traffic moving back and forth, all of those things are important to understand in terms of how we evaluate quick response teams. Another challenge is the lack of standardized outcomes. So as I alluded to, we don't really have, I think, consensus just yet on what outcomes QRT should be held accountable to. And so the big one that grant makers often point to is overdose. And oftentimes it's overdose rates at a county level, for example, or community level, which some of us would argue is probably not appropriate. These are individual level interventions. They're not macro level, meaning they're not meant to hit county level kinds of outcomes. And so, and even re-overdose for individuals that you serve may still be a bit to what we would call distal or distant from your work. Because again, you're getting into treatment and it's the job of treatment then, right, to get someone into recovery and help them stay in recovery and do that work. And so there's lots of intervening points between what a QRT does in terms of what that other outcome might be down the road. So we've got to have a lot more discussion related to what should be the outcomes that we say our QRT should be held accountable to. And as of right now, we don't have consensus in the field. We do have a certain amount of inconsistent data recording and entry. So not all teams enter the data in the same way. You may not all define things in the same way. So for example, a treatment referral or a treatment connection is often defined very differently across teams. So we may see everything from someone hands out a pamphlet to someone about a treatment program in their county to someone who actually drops them off at the door, and they're coding things as if those two are the same thing, and they're not. And so that kind of inconsistency makes it hard to at least do any kind of cross comparisons or bringing teams together to do a larger evaluation becomes a little more complex if we don't have the same definitions for our data. We're not all entering the data in the same way. So that's one of our current challenges as well. Another is that we just don't have that many published studies just yet, and the ones that we do are what we would call descriptive. So they describe a lot of what the QRTs do, but they're not necessarily evaluating the outcome of the work. And so that is, kind of causing some challenges to creating an evidence base when you don't yet have those published studies. There are more of them in the works, including work that Sarah and I are doing, and there are other teams both within Ohio and in other states that are also working on this issue. So the hope is we are all trying to work together to kind of fast track that out into the field so we can get that evidence base developed for these. And again, those evaluations that are being done are not as rigorous as we would like to see to be able to qualify something as evidence-based. So we are also working on some of that as well. Okay. So I'll hand it to you.
So all is not lost. I know it sounds a little bit frustrating maybe to hear some of this information, but I think it's important for us to raise these issues so that we can help teams do better, right? And help contribute to this evidence base. And so we've just are offering a few key tenets for you all to remember as you do your deflection work. The first is that we want to make systematic and accurate data collection a priority. So really making it part of the culture of your team. We know that deflection teams are incredibly busy and they're doing the work day in, day out. And the last thing that they probably want to do is worry about paperwork or data collection. We get that. There are more seamless ways to collect data and get information. And so we just encourage teams to work with their evaluators and try to figure out what's going to be best so that they can still prioritize that because it's so key. So that becomes part of the training and onboarding process for new members of the team, that you do ongoing spot checks on accuracy of data collection, making sure people are entering things consistently, using the same definitions, things like that. And like I said, bring an evaluator to the table from the get-go to help you with this. Secondly, we want to make sure that teams have very clear and measurable metrics of activities and outcomes so that they're able to definitively link the outcomes they want to target and they want to have to the activities that they're doing. So Kim talked about how overdose data at the county level and even maybe at the individual level may be inappropriate. They're a different level of analysis at the county level. It's too distal at the individual level. So really linking more proximal outcomes to the activities that the teams are working on. And that's when we're trying to look at outcomes at the individual level. We also might want to think about, as teams do this work and as you work with evaluators, thinking about kind of a broader picture about the work that deflection, the impact that deflection has on a community. So at the individual level, we're looking at these more proximal outcomes, but at the community level, we can start to look at the impact in terms of, how is this impacting community awareness, community acceptance of different harm reduction approaches, for example, stigma, things like that, connectivity among agencies within the county or in the community. Those are things that teams might wish to also look at. And then also just pulling from various sources of data. So the research shows that when you have different pieces of data saying the same thing, you've got a stronger case that you have to make. So, using self-report as well as official record, if you can get it, or official information, using both quantitative data, the numeric data, the numbers, as well as qualitative data, so that evaluators and folks are tracking the actual experiences of people who are doing this work and people who are receiving these services, to sort of put names with the data, put stories with the data that can be really impactful. When you're collecting data, we, try to keep it simple to help you remember the things that you need to be collecting. So the standard questions you ask in a journal article or any kind of investigation or research: who, what, where, when, and then why. So first of all, what are you doing is very, very key. And this goes back to the accountability piece that Kim talked about. So really keeping very detailed track of all of your activities, what's going into the work, and then who are you helping? So in terms of getting demographic information, maybe some even historical information about the individual when possible. We know that's different in different deflection programs. But also on the flip side of that, who are you not reaching? Because that can also help with CQI and also help reduce any disparities in the work that we're doing. Where are people coming from? How are they learning about you as a deflection program or team? And then also, where are they going next? That's a really important piece of the puzzle to try to understand, like, how deflection fits into all of this and fits into that path for recovery for individuals. When is important. So questions surrounding when, the timing of your intervention or the timing of your contact or connection with individuals that you're serving. Is it post-overdose? Is it at a certain phase in their recovery journey? How quickly after an overdose? How frequently? Questions like that are things that are good to ask yourselves and make sure that you're collecting data that answers those. And then at the center of it all is why, and that's really the qualitative piece. Like, why are things happening the way that they're happening? Why is this or isn't working? Things like that, to really kind of round it out and put meat on the bones, if you will. So Kim and I actually have an article forthcoming with a number of other colleagues in deflection that goes into the nitty-gritty of really specific metrics that we recommend teams collect. And that should be coming out soon-ish in the Journal of Community Justice. But we'll definitely share that with Dan and the team and with everybody here on this call when we're ready. That's all we have for you today.